Well, hey guys, welcome to the Grossmans Country Life, where we're building, fixing, and just enjoying life here on our small property in Georgia. And we recently had to replace our well pump, which left us with a big, ugly wellhead sticking up in our front yard. And rather than just throwing a foam rock on it like everybody else, I had to be a little different and decided to build this little outhouse. And this was a really fun and cool little build. Definitely gets a lot of attention when people come visit. And I did the whole thing for probably less than 50 bucks. And so if you have a wellhead you need to cover or just need a decorative piece for your yard, I'm going to walk you through the build on today's video. Really simple and straightforward, and you can build one of these for yourself. Now there are a few things I want to do to it still to dress it up and prepare it for the winter season. I'll talk about those at the end, but for now, let's get to building. First thing I needed to do was build the base for this thing. And after initially starting with one that was going to be a little bit too small, I decided on 22 inches by 22 inches to give plenty of room for my wellhead and water line. And by the time I added the cedar fence picket siding, that's going to put it pretty close to 2 foot by 2 foot. Now I had some scrap treated 2x4s on hand to make the base. Since it would come in contact with the ground, or at least maybe some blocks or bricks sitting on the ground, so I didn't want that to rot. And once I had those cut, I pre-drilled some holes in the ends of the 2 longer boards and then attached them to the shorter boards, making the 22 by 22 inch base. Then it was time for the 2 front supports. And since this thing would have a lean-to roof on it, I needed to cut one end of each board at an angle. And I went with 22.5 degrees because it made the math pretty easy. And I thought that would be a sufficient enough angle to give it a nice outhouse look. And I cut these so the overall height of the outhouse would end up at about 4 foot. I thought a 2 foot wide and deep footprint by 4 foot height would just give it a nice proportional outhouse look. Once cut, I set one of the front supports in place on my workbench and then used a piece of scrap 2x4 to figure out my measurements for those back supports. Now I could have figured it out with some basic high school geometry, but I was not in a math mood at the time. I wanted to make it simple as possible and ensure that I got the right length the first time. So I lined everything up and marked the board for the cut. And of course these will get the same 22.5 degree angle as those front support boards did. Once I had those cut, I once again laid my board in place so I could figure out the cuts that I needed for my top boards, which would serve as the roof supports for the tin roof that I'm going to put on this thing. Now once I cut those and put one in place, it hit me that these will be easier to build out as 2 complete side pieces rather than trying to attach all this to that initial base that I started with. So with that in mind, I disassembled my base, headed over to my VEVOR pocket hole jig, which has, man, that thing has been a great addition to my tool collection. If you're in need of a pocket hole jig and you don't want to spend that Craig money, check out the VEVOR, and I will put a link to that in the description below. But once I had my pocket holes drilled on those front and back supports, I attached them to the base and the top boards using 2 1/4 inch pocket hole screws, and that allowed me to finish out both sides of the outhouse. Then I could finally reattach the 2 other pieces of the base, that front and back piece of the base, to tie those 2 sides together. And since this whole thing's going to be covered with cedar siding, I didn't bother with pocket hole jigs on those 2 boards. I just shot the screws in from the sides and made it simple on myself. Then I cut several 15-inch support boards to put in place at the front and back of the top, as well as in the middle of each side, just to help support those vertical cedar fence pickets when I attached them. Now, I've already made a significant mistake at this point, and I have no idea about it. So if you've already noticed what I'm doing wrong, let me know in the comments below. I'll be curious to hear how many of you caught it before I reveal my mistake. But I'll figure it out here pretty soon, just not as soon as I should have. So with the frame all assembled, now it's time to start putting on the cedar fence pickets for siding. And since this was a rustic outhouse, I opted not to plane or sand the boards smooth. I just left them with that more rough and rustic look. So one by one, I went down the side and then across the front, marking and cutting each board to ensure a good fit. And as you would expect, all the side boards got that same 22.5 degree cut at the top. And yeah, I still haven't realized my mistake yet. But as I finish nailing on the first board on the opposite side, I finally wake up and realize that I'm building this thing backwards. I completely covered up the front of the outhouse where my door's gonna go, and I left an overhang on what should be the back of the outhouse instead of the front. Oh, yep, that's right. I'm an idiot. So with my head hung in shame, I go ahead and cut off the 2 overhang pieces. I definitely don't need them on the back of this thing, and honestly, I can get by without them on the front as well. Then after going through and painfully removing all the pickets and the middle 2x4 support on what's supposed to be the front of the outhouse, I get back to putting siding on both sides and the actual back this time. Then I test fitted an old piece of tin that I happened to have on hand, which was a great fit. I centered it up to where it looked good and then screwed it into place. I then added a piece of cedar fence picket at the top of the front, above where the door will go, just as a trim piece. And then I went ahead and attached 2x4, I guess you could call them jack studs, to both sides of the door frame, just to fill that space out a little and help support the weight of the door. Before I build out the door though, I put some cedar trim over those vertical 2x4s on each side, just to kind of finish out that front. Then it was on to the door to finish this thing out. I ripped down 3 fence pickets to get the perfect width for the door that would leave a slight, roughly 1/8 inch gap all the way around. And once I cut those down to length, I used 2 boards to hold those 3 pieces together. One about 10 inches from the top and the other roughly 10 inches from the bottom. And not only would it hold those 3 boards together, but it would also give me something a little more substantial to screw those hinges into when I put those on. And so I glued those support boards on the back of the door and held them in place with 1-inch screws. And I didn't get it on video, but I did end up adding a 3rd support piece at the very top of the door too. Before we mount the door though, there was one key detail that I still needed to work out. That classic crescent moon cutout. I drew it out with a pencil using a paint can to kind of help me with the shape, then drilled a starter hole and cut it out with my jigsaw. With that done, it was time to install the hinges on the door, and again I installed those in line with the main two support boards on the back of the door so I could screw into those boards. And the door is pretty light overall, so I think 2 hinges should be plenty strong enough to support that thing over time. Then using a small spacer at the bottom of the door, I attached the hinges to the outhouse itself, trying to leave a uniform gap all the way around the door. And then I finished things off by installing a small rotating block that will act as the door latch. And at that point, all that was left to do was set this thing in place to cover our new wellhead. Well, all right, guys, what a fun and cool little build. And like I mentioned at the beginning, it does get a lot of attention when people come visit. Had a lot of great compliments on this thing. Now, as I promised, there are a few things that I still need to do to this to kind of dress it up and to prepare it for winter. Now, as far as the dress up, I'm going to put some landscape stones around the outside of this thing. We're going to put some mulch in here and plant some flowers around it just to give it a nicer appearance. Maybe even a couple little stepping stones like you might expect to see to a real outhouse. And then as far as preparing it for winter, we get a little cold here in middle Georgia, not terribly, but we do have some below freezing temperatures. And obviously I don't want any of my pipes or the well to freeze. And so I'm going to insulate this thing on the inside with probably some 2-inch foam board insulation on all the walls, as well as the door. I'll probably paint that insulation black where it shows up against the little crescent moon here. That way you don't see that pink foam through the crescent moon. But yeah, I do need to insulate this. And I also bought some anchors. I should have had them out here. But I bought some anchors that are, I think, about a foot long, that I'm going to drill into the ground here on the inside and attach this thing. So if we get a big storm, it doesn't blow this over and, you know, bust a pipe on my wellhead there. So a couple of things you want to do if you're going to put one of these over a wellhead. Make sure you anchor it, which I'm going to do. And if you're in a climate where it gets below freezing, make sure you insulate it. But that's going to wrap up this build. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss another one of our videos. We got a lot of other builds on here, as well as just content surrounding, you know, our property and the life we're building here on our 26 acres in Georgia. So as always, guys, I'll see you on our next video.